In the last video, we focused on product differentiation as a method of perhaps reducing competition and narrowing down the scope of the customers that you're competing over. In this video, what we want to focus in on is quality competition as an alternative to price competition that we talked about before, and then sort of combine product differentiation, quality competition, and talk a little bit about market segmentation and the rationale for that, and then what you gain from it. So, quality competition, where you're not necessarily competing based on the price of the good in question, but you're competing based on whether it's true or inferred quality. So when you say, we were using cars as an example in the last video when talking about product differentiation. So if I say the terms like either Mercedes or BMW and Kia, there's an implied quality within Mercedes and BMW, and with Kia, the perception is sort of value, lower cost, but also lower quality. Right or wrong, that's the assumption that comes in there. Now, if firms compete based on quality. Now, what I'm referring here back to is when we talked about pure price competition, in one of the videos we showed game theoretically they would keep undercutting each other and driving profit way down. If they're competing instead of on price, if they can compete on quality and they can differentiate their good as it's a higher quality, so sort of vertical differentiation, it's a better good than some other good, then they don't have to worry about that other firm undercutting them. So implicitly, BMW doesn't worry about what Kia is doing with their price. Yes, Kia has a lower price, but they're competing for a different part of the market, and they're competing on quality, and they might be competing within that section of upper-end quality on price, but they're not competing with all auto manufacturers on price. Now, and that should seem pretty similar to what we were talking about last time with product differentiation. But when it comes to quality, when products are differentiated based on quality, there's some extra conditions that we have to worry about or we have to talk about in terms of the ability to use quality competition. So when a firm wants to change the quality of its products, there's two things that the success of that venture is dependent on. One, does it increase demand? So let's say Kia wanted to start competing with, and I apologize, I've got nothing against Kia, I apologize to the Kia owners, but it's just an example. What if Kia wanted to start competing with BMW? What if they started really putting some energy into beefing up the quality and the luxury of their vehicles to try and compete with BMW? Okay, that's going to be effective for them under two conditions. One, it has to increase their demand. Two, it has to change their profit per unit. So they've got to be able to derive extra profit from that. Granted, it's going to cost them more, so they've got to derive extra profit, and it's got to impact their demand. So are those two things likely? So the demand component is actually kind of complicated. When a firm changes the quality of its product, the demand only changes if there are customers, what we'll call marginal customers, who are kind of on the fence in terms of what they're going to buy. And these customers can actually determine that quality has changed. If Kia is cemented in people's minds as lower quality than BMW or Mercedes, they're not going to really change their demand as Kia starts upping their quality, because it's sort of this maybe habit, but it's sort of so ingrained in their mind that Kia is a different quality level that it's unlikely, if Kia starts improving quality, it's unlikely for them to actually be able to crack through that barrier. And that's where some interesting things come into play that you see all the time in terms of business practices, trying to convey that quality to overcome this sort of bias that people have towards what their memory and their short sort of recollection gut response instinct happens to be. So, two things that help in this regard. So, when customers can't judge quality, you get independent evaluators. So, historically, this is like Consumer Reports, JD Powers, but YouTube. And we can argue, and there's many people on YouTube that are not independent, but YouTube reviewers are getting more and more traction and leverage in terms of evaluating quality of different products. Again, maybe not sort of independent, especially when they're often provided the goods free and those sorts of things. But customers are still viewing that content and they're interpreting that as some kind of evidence of changes in quality. So if that information is getting out there through those sources, that will start to change people's perceptions, and then also allowing customers to experience the good. So taste tests, free samples. So like everything from like you go to Costco and you walk around and on some of the end of the aisles they're giving samples of different things, to test drives, to all kinds of different, there's dealers now they'll let you take it for a weekend and see how you like it. So allowing customers to actually experience it can then also sort of overcome that preconceived notions people have, because those tend to be very powerful psychological forces that need to be overcome if a company wants to change its quality and start competing in sort of a different quality arena, if you will. Okay, so now between quality competition and product differentiation, this leads us into a discussion about market segmentation. So when we talk market segmentation, we're talking about a strategy, a approach, a process where a business is dividing a target market into subsets. It could be subsets of consumers, countries, regions, whatever, and these subsets are perceived to have some commonality, something common between them that allows the business to then design and implement strategies to target them. So, very, very common rationales for why someone would want to segment a market like this, and then we'll talk about an example and then how we different aspects of that we can segment based on. So the most common rationales for why you would segment the market: one, increasing advertising effectiveness. You're going to target it towards, so maybe it's in, you target it in magazines or on TV shows that are watched by the target demographic you have. Or you put it on TV stations, radio stations, those sorts of things that geographically are in the region you're targeting. So, rather than having this terribly broad advertising campaign, you tend to focus it in. So you advertise beer during football games, those sorts of things, because you want to target it towards a certain demographic. It could also be improving product quality. So you segment things out, and by segmenting it out, the next example I'll go through, we'll actually talk about sort of market segmentation, and the goal there is really product quality. And then also it reduces the level of competition faced, and I'll also come back to that. But if you think of what we talked about last time with product differentiation, you think about that sort of spectrum of some product quality, and rather than competing with the entire spectrum, if you segment the market out and you're only focused on this part of the market, there's less competition. You're not worried about what's going on over here and what's going on over here. You're only focused on that portion of the market. So you will come across other rationales for segmenting out a market. those tend to be the three largest, most commonly cited reasons why someone would want to do that. Okay, now this map is so anyone that's been to one, mainly in California, but you can see they're starting to creep up into Oregon. In-N-Out Burger. Okay, so In-N-Out Burger, very, very concentrated within California, very, very popular. Every time I've been, there's long, long lines and lots of people there. So how do they segment things out? And if it's so popular, why are we not seeing them elsewhere? In fact, if you Google and you Google like In-N-Out Seattle, you'll find articles that talk about why In-N-Out won't be coming here very soon. And really, what's going on there is they're segmenting the market, but they're doing it, they would argue, mainly for quality considerations. So, what their policy is they will only open up stores or allow stores to be opened if they are located within 500 miles of a distribution facility. So they don't want to freeze the meat. They want a lot of control over the quality of the ingredients, the quality of the food they produce. And so if you're beyond 500 miles from a distribution center, they won't allow a location there. So they started in Southern California. Recently, I want to say it was '08. They opened a distribution center in outside the Dallas area. So you see all of these locations start to pop up. But what they're really doing is they're segmenting out sort of quality control. They're not allowing for locations that are outside of a specified area so that they can control what's going on there. Now, this also allows them to target their advertising, those sorts of things. You're not going to see them advertising outside of these areas in general. Now, you do see oftentimes you'll see restaurants advertise where there are no locations, and they're trying to lay the groundwork for expanding into that region. But this allows them to really segment out quality as a primary factor in terms of what they're selling. Now, there are many types of or ways that markets can be segmented. The most common ones, so geographic, so they boil things down to where we're going to market in the Northwest or maybe even a smaller scale, and we're going to treat that as a market. Distribution chains, so what retailers get to carry your goods. So you go to many products websites and they say, can be found at these retailers. And they really focus on that relationship that they have with those retailers and making sure that the retailers are accurately displaying their products, those sorts of things. So they have these agreements with the retailers like, you're never going to put our products on the bottom shelves, those sorts of things, to really kind of segment out the market. Price segmentation. So we've talked in the past about Banana Republic, Gap, Old Navy being sort of product lines. Cars do the same thing. And those can be different segments aimed at different markets. And then demographics. So you have stores that are tailored towards like women's clothes or different types of clientele, if you will. And so these different segmentations, what they do is they take what we started this class with, the overall sort of what is the competitive environment, and they break that down. One of the complications we talked about within that very first module is, okay, we've got a concentration ratio or a Herfindahl index for, say, restaurants. But if we're in Spokane, is a national measure of concentration valid? Because anyone that lives in Spokane, when they're going to eat at a restaurant, what's important is what restaurants are in Spokane. And so by segmenting things out in this way, they're able to move from sort of a broad competitive environment to a much narrower competitive environment. And they're competing in lots of these individual segments, and they're able to then focus on those segments individually and raise their profits. They're able to basically reduce the amount of competition that it appears they face, which then leads to higher profits.